How could an innocent man who was freed after 2 decades behind bars find himself facing the terrifying reality of going back inside? The truth is stranger than fiction, and to answer that question, we have to go back to 1999. We're talking about the wrongful conviction of Andre Brown, a man whose life was irrevocably altered by a system that failed him. This isn't just a story about a mistake. It's a story about a fight for truth, a desperate search for what really happened, and a revelation that will leave you stunned. Stay with me, because the details of this case and where it ultimately leads are something you won't want to miss. Our story begins in a community rocked by a violent crime. The pressure to find a perpetrator was immense, and in that rush to judgment, the seeds of a grave injustice were sown. Andre Brown, a name that would become synonymous with this fight for truth, found himself at the center of a storm he couldn't have imagined. In 1999, Andre Brown was living his life, completely unaware that he was about to be accused of a crime he not only didn't commit, but physically couldn't have committed. 5 days earlier, 2 teenage boys had been shot in the Bronx, one paralyzed for life, the other riddled with 6 bullets, and the community, understandably, was demanding answers, and more importantly, demanding justice. Law enforcement was under immense pressure to make an arrest, to restore a sense of safety. And in cases like this, as we've unfortunately seen time and time again, that pressure can sometimes lead to tunnel vision. I was an innocent man who had nothing to hide, Andre thought. That confidence, that faith in the system, would cost Andre Brown the next 23 years of his life. But here's what makes this case truly extraordinary, and what will shock you by the end of this story. The real shooter was hiding in plain sight. Multiple witnesses knew who he was. The police had his name, and he looked almost exactly like Andre Brown. Yet somehow, none of that mattered. Because in the world of wrongful convictions, sometimes the truth isn't enough. January 15th, 1999, a Friday evening in the Bronx. The corner of White Plains Road and Britton Street, a spot known for drug activity where territorial disputes could turn deadly in seconds. At approximately 5:33 p.m., a masked gunman approached 2 teenage drug dealers, O'Neal Virgo and Sean Nicholson. Without warning, the assailant opened fire. Virgo was shot 6 times at point-blank range, execution style. Somehow, miraculously, he survived. But the gunman wasn't finished. As Nicholson ran for his life, the shooter gave chase. Picture this scene: an 18-year-old sprinting down the street, terror driving every step, while behind him a gunman pursues with deadly intent. The shooter ran after Nicholson for more than a city block, that's over 100 yards, before catching up to him at the corner of Britton Street and Olinville Avenue. 1 shot to the back. That's all it took. Sean Nicholson fell to the ground, paralyzed from the waist down. He would never walk again. Stephanie Telfer was sitting in traffic about half a block away when she heard the popping sounds. 4 shots, then silence, then more shots. From her car, she watched in horror as the gunman chased Nicholson down the street. And here's the crucial detail. As the shooter ran, he removed his mask. Telfer said she recognized him. She knew him from the neighborhood as Dre. 5 days later, on January 20th, 1999, Andre Brown heard the police were looking for him. He was 22 years old, a student at the borough of Manhattan Community College, trying to build a better life after a troubled past of dealing drugs. Andre turned his life around after he'd decided that he had to leave that world behind or end up dead. When he learned about the police interest, he didn't run. He didn't hide. He walked into the 49th precinct with his attorney, Martin Fisher, ready to clear things up. That evening, Stephanie Telfer picked Andre Brown out of a lineup. But here's what the jury would never fully understand: what Andre Brown's lawyer, Thomas Lee, inexplicably failed to present at trial. 1 year before the shooting, in January 1998, Andre Brown had been shot in the leg during a drug dispute. This wasn't just a flesh wound. The bullet had caused severe damage, requiring multiple surgeries. Dr. Ronald Simon, the surgeon who operated on Brown, would later testify about the extent of the injuries. Brown had suffered from compartment syndrome, a condition where pressure builds up in the muscles to dangerous levels. The surgeons had to cut open all 4 quadrants of his calf, leaving him with open wounds that required a second surgery in February 1998 just to close them. The injury caused nerve damage and foot drop. Brown literally couldn't lift his foot properly. He needed physical therapy. He walked with a noticeable impairment. Most importantly, he couldn't run. He couldn't even jog or walk at a fast pace without assistance. The medical evidence was clear. It was physically impossible for Andre Brown to have chased anyone down a city block in January 1999. Yet Thomas Lee never presented this evidence to the jury. Not a single medical record, not one doctor's testimony, nothing. And here's where our story takes an even darker turn. Thomas Lee wasn't just any attorney. He was connected to the mob, specifically the Lucchese crime family. In 2005, 5 years after Andre Brown's conviction, Lee would be charged with racketeering. Federal prosecutors revealed that Lee had been passing messages between imprisoned mob bosses, including orders for executions of witnesses. Imagine that. The lawyer supposedly defending Andre Brown was simultaneously working for organized crime, helping plan murders of people who might testify against the mob. But it gets worse. Remember Stephanie Telfer, the eyewitness who identified Andre? The night before she was scheduled to testify at trial, someone left an envelope on her car windshield. Inside were 2 bullets and a note. "This is what informers get. If my friend gets any time, I have much more with your name on it." Telfer was terrified. So terrified that when she finally took the stand, she claimed total ignorance of the crime. The judge, believing she had been intimidated, made an unusual ruling. He allowed prosecutors to read her grand jury testimony to the jury instead. This meant Thomas Lee couldn't cross-examine her, couldn't challenge her identification, couldn't point out that she'd only identified Andre after seeing wanted posters with his face plastered all over the Bronx. This basically allowed a one-sided argument to be presented as evidence and denied Andre the right to face his accuser. The jury never heard that Telfer had been sitting in traffic, half a block away, terrified, in fading light with only one streetlight illuminating the scene. They never heard how the wanted posters might have influenced her memory. They just heard her testimony, read like facts, identifying Andre Brown as the shooter. But here's the twist that should have changed everything. There was another suspect. His name was Shonda Tyrell, street name Bonkers. And the similarities between him and Andre Brown were striking. Both were light-skinned African-American men. Both wore their hair in afros. Both lived in the same neighborhood, the Allerton Avenue Co-ops. It's easy to see how only glimpsing the shooter for a moment, someone could confuse him with someone they've seen in your neighborhood. 2 witnesses, Jamal Graham and Anthony Cleveland, would later come forward with explosive testimony. Graham said that just 4 days before the shooting, on January 11th, he had witnessed Bonkers in a shootout with drug dealers at the exact same corner where Virgo and Nicholson would be shot. Same corner. Same victim, because Virgo was one of the dealers Bonkers had been shooting at. Cleveland's testimony was even more damning. He said that on the night of January 15th, he saw Bonkers chasing someone with a gun held upward. He heard 4 shots and saw Virgo lying on the ground. The witnesses described Bonkers as violent, unpredictable, someone who would shoot you up for no reason. They said he and Virgo were in a turf war over drug corners. Graham testified that after the January 11th shootout, Bonkers had sworn he would get Virgo the next time he saw him. 4 days later, Virgo was shot 6 times. But the jury heard none of this. They didn't know about Bonkers. They didn't know about the previous shootout. They didn't know that ballistics evidence showed the same gun used on January 11th was used to shoot Virgo and Nicholson on January 15th. And here's perhaps the most telling detail. Shonda Bonkers Tyrell was killed 10 months after the shooting, right before Andre Brown's trial began. Some speculate that Virgo and Nicholson identified Andre Brown precisely because they wanted to handle Bonkers themselves, street justice style, while letting the legal system convict an innocent man. In March 2000, Andre Brown was convicted of 2 counts of attempted murder in the 2nd degree. The sentence, 40 years to life in prison. He was 23 years old. It was just an astronomical, heart-wrenching feeling, Brown would later say. I want to say that I lost hope at that moment when they put the handcuffs on me. For the next 23 years, Andre Brown fought to prove his innocence. He filed appeal after appeal, taught himself law, became a paralegal. He wrote letters, studied case law, never gave up hope even as year after year passed behind bars. Meanwhile, Thomas Lee, his attorney, became the first lawyer ever admitted to the Federal Witness Protection Program after testifying against the Bonanno crime family. He served just 3 days in federal custody for his racketeering conviction. In 2021, incredibly, his law license was reinstated. The breakthrough for Andre Brown finally came in 2019 when he found lawyers who believed in his innocence, Oscar Michelin and Jeffrey Deskovic. Deskovic himself had been wrongfully convicted and served 16 years in prison before being exonerated. He understood what Andre was going through in a way few others could. They uncovered the medical evidence Thomas Lee had ignored. They found the witnesses who knew about Bonkers. They pieced together what really happened that night in January 1999. On December 1st, 2022, after a lengthy hearing, Bronx Supreme Court Judge David Lewis issued a 93-page decision. The judge found that Thomas Lee had been ineffective for failing to present the medical evidence that would have proven Andre Brown couldn't have committed the crime. If Brown couldn't run, he couldn't have chased Nicholson. If he couldn't chase Nicholson, he couldn't be the shooter. Andre Brown had spent as much time in prison as he previously did as a free man. He was 23 years old at the time of his conviction. He spent 23 years in prison. Literally half of his life was lived behind bars. But this story doesn't have a Hollywood ending. Not yet. The Bronx District Attorney appealed the judge's decision. In a shocking turn of events, on Christmas Eve 2024, an appeals court reinstated Andre's conviction, suggesting that perhaps Thomas Lee's failure to present the medical evidence had been strategic. Really? Strategic? As if not presenting exculpatory evidence that would have proven your client's innocence is a strategy? As of early 2025, Andre Brown faced the unthinkable. After 2 years of freedom, after rebuilding his life, after working with at-risk youth and founding education programs, he might have to return to prison to serve the remaining 17 years of his sentence. It's unimaginable. A man who has already served 23 years for a crime he didn't commit, who has proven himself a valuable member of society since his release, might be sent back to prison because of an appellate judge's ludicrous opinion and a prosecutor who wants to protect a conviction. The evidence of his innocence is overwhelming. The real shooter was identified by multiple witnesses. The medical evidence proves Andre couldn't have run after the victims. His lawyer was literally convicted of racketeering and admitted to intimidating witnesses. The medical evidence alone should have been enough to prove he couldn't have possibly been the shooter. Yet the system seems determined to keep grinding forward, more concerned with procedure than justice. This case raises profound questions about our criminal justice system. How can eyewitness testimony outweigh medical impossibility? How can a conviction stand when the defense attorney was working for organized crime? How can an innocent man lose 40 years of his life while the real killer was known to multiple witnesses? Andre Brown's case contains all the classic elements of wrongful conviction: eyewitness misidentification, ineffective counsel, tunnel vision by police, and the suppression of exculpatory evidence. But it also contains something else: proof that even when the truth comes out, even when innocence is demonstrated, the system often refuses to admit its mistakes. The fight is not over. Thanks to the incredible Maggie Freeling, who hosts an amazing podcast where I first heard this story, called Unjust and Unsolved, as well as the legendary Jason Flom, who hosts the Wrongful Conviction podcast. Andre has some heavy hitters in his corner and a platform to spread his message. Recently, Andre's return to prison was delayed due to the incredible efforts of everyday people just like you who wrote letters, made their voices heard, and presented a united front. Now it's time to fight again. In the description below, as well as on this screen in front of you, will be the contact information of the Bronx District Attorney Darcel Clark, as well as New York Governor Kathy Hochul. And what I'm asking for is simple. Write a letter, send an email, make a phone call, or do all of them. Ask the governor to grant Andre clemency for his wrongful conviction. Express that in only 2 years, he's begun working with troubled youth and has already made a positive impact on the community. Relate the importance of Andre as a role model, and that allowing him to be sent back to prison is not only a miscarriage of justice, but will have profound consequences for those who look up to him and those he impacts on a daily basis. Ask the district attorney to grant Andre time served for his 23 years he spent unjustly imprisoned. No effort is too small. Every one of you can make a difference. I promise you that. Make your voice heard. Andre Brown has already suffered far more than any human should have to, and the prospect of his potential return to prison must be earth-shattering. Don't allow his family to be ripped apart because of politics and technicalities. We can be one person throwing stones at a castle, or we can be an army of hundreds and thousands. Andre needs our help, now more than ever. You don't have to be a resident of New York. You are a citizen of the United States and of this planet, and you have a right to make your voice heard. Please, help Andre finally move on and live his life in peace as he deserves. The only way we change a broken system is by shining a light on its failures. Justice delayed is justice denied. But for Andre Brown, even after 23 years, the fight for justice continues. I hope you'll join him in that fight.